You might be wondering what launching a podcast as a property manager has anything to do about breaking the frame, but that's because you haven't met Mark Ainley. Mark and his Straight Up Chicago Investor podcast has completely broken the frame on what's possible in marketing in a local market in Chicago specifically to dominate. And he is just a different breed of cat. I think he's got over 1,000 doors, building a super profitable business. He's also got really interesting opinions on the future and the present of property management. And he shares not just his formula for how he made his podcast profitable for himself in just year one, but really advanced AI techniques that he's using in his business. You're gonna love this conversation with Mark Ainley. So I'm just gonna stop talking. Enjoy this episode. Let me know what you think. Welcome to the Property Management Frame Breakers podcast. I'm your host, Pablo Gonzalez, and I am here to introduce you to the folks in the property management space that have broken the frame of what you may believe was possible. This podcast is presented by Vendoroo. It is your all-in-one AI solution for resolving your maintenance needs. Let's go. Mark Ainley, you and I met at Broker Owner. I had just come off the stage talking about like my whole word of mouth flywheel content creation community thing. And you're like, man, it sounds a lot like what we're doing in Chicago with the Straight Up Chicago Investor podcast. I immediately look into you and I realize that not only do you have a podcast, but you're kind of like a beloved figure in your market, to the point that you're selling shoes with you and your partner's face on it to people that follow your podcast. So I've been dying to have this conversation with you, man. Thank you for doing this.
We've only sold a few pairs. Let's just leave it at that. It's not a hot seller. It's more of a gag gift. But yeah, man, I was so that broker owner meeting you was probably one of the best things that came out of that, because our space doesn't talk about what you talked about there that day enough. And I remember waiting patiently in the courtyard after you interviewed somebody else for like, it was a long interview too. And I couldn't wait to talk to you. So here we are 6-7 months later. I'm just excited that we connected, and we did some other things too. So
we did. We immediately went into doing some other things, which is really, really cool. So let's talk about it, man. Right. You just finished telling me that this industry doesn't do a fifth of what you do in content. And if they did, they would do really well for them, right? Because it's a young industry. Tell us, when you describe your content program and like what you're doing, how do you describe it to people?
Well, here, you know, it's funny. And I think about this, Jordan Whala, it was only 2018 that he started saying like departmentalizing sales and marketing. Like that wasn't even a thing in our industry before 2018. So jumping into it back then at that point and doing that ourselves, it just kind of trial and error ever since. But the opportunity for anybody to, here's the thing that really gets me excited is in the property management space, no matter what city you're in, it probably doesn't take that much to stand out above and beyond what your competition is doing. And that's where I think property managers have a real leverage in any market that they're in.
Yeah, totally. And just to bring our friend who's listening into the conversation right now, we're talking about you having a local market podcast for Chicago where you interview other investors. I assume you're interviewing active clients, people that you want to meet. You and I work together to bring in like a lending provider and do like a brand collaboration there at an event, right? Like you've kind of like injected this thing into what you are doing in building relationships, in creating content, to the point where I believe, was it last year that you guys went all in and you built a studio inside your office?
Yeah, no. So we started this in 2020. It was the year of COVID. It wasn't because of COVID, but right before COVID, we launched this, and we're on. I think this week we'll hit 350, episode 350. I think this month. And like I said, that's the goal: is interviewing investors and interviewing clients. People. That's one of the benefits: interviewing people I want to talk to. And the funny thing is, we did Zoom all the way up until end of 2023. And it was an intern that we had working on our show. He's like, hey man, like if you guys like Zoom's cool, but It's not. Like, if you guys want to start doing this, like, you want to interview someone across the country, do Zoom all day long. But man, you got to have people that are living down the street and you're doing Zoom with them. So he's the one that actually convinced us. And he actually, young guy, he gave us a budget. He went and built it all out, set it up for us. So we definitely had a who in him and helping us get that all off the ground.
Yeah. And, to kind of like insight into what that young man said, right? Like, I think it's really intelligent because most people, when they think of a podcast, they're thinking of, hey, how many listeners do I have? How many subscribers, right? Like, what are my download numbers? Like, they're thinking of their audience. But I think what you just alluded to right now of like, you can have people that you're not doing business with yet. Just the opportunity to have a stage, the opportunity to show up and highlight somebody else and how you can create that is going to open really, really great doors. It's like the ultimate networking tool. And for the podcast that you and I are doing right now, right? Like the podcast I'm doing with Vendoroo, it's national. I'm doing a mix of like in person and not with people that I can, depending on when I can get in front of them. But for me, when it comes to a one market property manager, the opportunity to do this belly to belly, right? Like get in front of somebody, spend an hour, spend half an hour just kind of like BSing with them, getting to know them to see what they're going to look good. And then an hour talking to them of just like, why are you so smart and why are you so cool? And let me share it with all my friends. To me, that creates these like really, really intimate relationships. Is that what you guys were doing on the way in, or is that something that you've like figured out later on?
Figure out on the way on or later on. And I think, we started off and then obviously went to the Zoom period and you were kind of forced to, I'm sorry, the COVID period, and you're forced to stay in Zoom, but we
Yeah.
never came out of that. But no different than why people are going back to the office now. We thought that was going to stay forever, remote work, remote. People are going back to the office because they want to be around people. And I think that human element, and now you take that upon two people that are maybe in the same business or both landlords or vendor and client, like that's huge. That rapport piece, like when you, it's corny, I say break bread, when you break bread with someone or you hang out with someone or you BS with somebody for, man, just eye to eye and you connect on a few different points or you laugh about a couple of things, like the value you get from that over a period of time is huge. And think about this: before everyone gets in business, they say go have coffees, you go do networking, you do all that stuff. Now, what with the podcasting is you're able to do that one-on-one with that person, but you're actually able to record that and now send that out to everyone else, and they can see how you're building that rapport. So it's such a twofer when it comes down to it.
I couldn't agree more, man. I like to call content co-creation the new golf. Like when you wanted to get like some private one-on-one quality time with a dude, you just say, hey, let me interview you on my podcast. And you're getting that same like quality time. Plus you get to show everybody that you're friends and you plug it into your content ecosystem, right?
Well, you know what? Also, we did as another kind of taking this one step further is,
Yeah.
think about how many times people are like, hey, you want to grab coffee or maybe a realtor, or another vendor or something like that.
Mhm.
I stopped like going out for coffee or lunches just for whatever. You got to travel, you got to go there, you got to like, so I invite them over here and we sit down and say, we're going to record it for an hour and let's just shoot the shit. But then we have content then. So, it might be a realtor or somebody else. And it's not necessarily investor content, but if you go back and forth the conversation, now they're kind of talking to me, interviewing me a little, I'm interviewing them, and it's
Yeah.
just very formal. And now you throw that on YouTube and you get a few hundred people that will watch it. So
Yeah, 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 totally. That's a good point, right? Like the multifunctionality of it, right? Like you are making content for them, but you're also making content for yourself. You're also practicing your speaking points and you're like testing messaging and whatnot, right? So like you get to plug it into your stuff. It's like the learning thing, you're giving it to them. And then the last piece of it is what I call the digital word of mouth piece, right? Like if you're making content for a realtor and the realtor is going to be like, hey, look how cool I look, people that check in on that are like, oh, my friend's on TV, and who are they talking to, right? Like, have you had experienced those externalities when other people share about them? It comes back to you.
oh yeah, definitely. And you said it before is when you can make other people look good, then the person they made look good will always remember that. And then
Yeah,
there are people in their network that see them looking good, remember who the person is that made them look good. Like, so that sounds
yeah,
very confusing, but I think anyone got that. So like that's a huge part. Like you're not even going out there selling yourself because I could do this, I can do that. It's like you're actually selling someone else and you're looking good because of it. You know exactly about it. You're good at it too, Pablo.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally. I am such a believer in like being a kingmaker as opposed to trying to be a king, right? Like if you show up as somebody that people like get ahead with, then everybody wants to be your friend kind of thing, right? So like I sense like a deep connection with you in that kind of like ethos. Talk to me about, so we've just kind of like talked about how cool it is, right? Give me some real, and I want to get into like exactly what you're doing and give some like practical actionable tips here for someone listening to. But before we go there, give me some like real results here, man. Like how do you judge the spend on this thing? Like do you are you getting do you get a sense that you get a certain amount of clients for this? Like how do you consider this thing a success outside of how fun this thing is?
Well, that's kind of gone through a few of evolutions. When I first started, and this is probably good advice for anybody out there, is a lot of times people are beating our property management industry over the head of like, just get on there, just make content, just do videos, just do one, like get comfortable with it. This doing a podcast is so much different than me just jumping and doing a monologue on a recording. So when we started out with the podcast, I said, you know what, man, if no one really listens and I could get 20 or 30 clips out of every episode, like that's probably that's probably a win for me in that sense. So the content that you get from recording these interviews is huge in itself, and there's super amount of value there. So going on to your question though, is when we first started off, I wrote this down as our first year in 2020 on our budget. I think it was $12,000 or $13,000 line item expense that went into marketing for the property management. And quickly it turned into actually we make revenue on it nowadays. It did that first year. All it took was a few, I think it was a couple lenders and a couple of attorneys were like, hey man, I'll give you $500 if I could throw a quick ad on there. So we actually scrambled to kind of like, all right, we need a form, we need actually a contract and all that stuff. So put the pricing out there. And in the first year, we made money. We actually, then it kind of made us start thinking of like, all right, can we make a couple more bucks on this? And then we started sponsoring. At the end, we do a Chicago fact. That's one of the things everybody comes on and we do a question, but now it's sponsored by somebody and they, we make a couple bucks from that. So it turned into a profit center for us on that side. So at this point, it hasn't necessarily cost us money. Now, I'll tell you this on the flip side, though, it could be negative. You're like, oh, well, I'm making some money, so I'm not going to try as hard to get as much business. Horrible. I fall into that trap. I'll go through pockets of that. But as far as if you look at it this way, though, for anybody that's listening, even if you're not going to go after the sponsors or anything like that, which I'm sure anyone could go find enough to offset the costs as a win-win there. But even if it costs you $10,000 or $12,000 after your kind of costs are out there, that's still very cheap compared to what you might be paying for Google ads or one of the other buckets that your marketing is falling into. That's probably not getting you the return or the evergreen content that you're making.
Super interesting, right? Like that's something I didn't even think about walking into this because I've never, as you know, I've produced 1,000 podcast episodes. I've never actually like had a sponsor for any of them. Actually, I had somebody approach me one time for one of mine, and I was like, I'm not interested because I want to keep creative control. But the idea that as a niche industry local market podcast, when you bring on one of your lenders or one of your vendors, one of the folks that you do business with that does business with the other real estate investors that you're doing this, that you are likely to get approached of just like, hey, can I throw on a sponsor read on that thing and very quickly turn it into a couple $100 an episode kind of thing? That's what happened to you guys just organically?
Yeah, organically. Well, think about this. Just using lenders for an example, they make 4 or 5 grand a clip usually. And then you throw these commercial lenders, they're doing $1 million deals. They're making 10, 12, 15, 20 a clip. So for them to do a year of sponsorship for us and cut us a check for $7,000 or $10,000, like that's nothing. And if you think about this, our audience, you can't get any more niche down to who your direct, you can't go anywhere for that sort of like everybody is your exact avatar for the most part if you're going to be using a lender as an example.
Yeah, man, I hadn't thought about that, right? Like my lender buddies will happily throw $500 at some like outdoor ad for a boat parade or something like that.
Yeah,
Just
they'll
like,
get
yeah,
shit
fuck
for it.
it. Yeah, that's true, man. That's cool. All right, then tell me about. All right, so you monetize it immediately, just like direct line expense. Can you give me a story of the biggest deal that you have closed as far as like a client for you coming from the podcast? Has that happened?
Yeah, it ends up being you get a lot more referrals from the podcast. So you get the listeners that listen, and then they refer. That's where we've got more business from than anything. So the direct listener has been someone that's referred us, and then they also, that person becomes a listener. So that's, for what I'm able to track, the most of our business has been a referral of somebody on there. Now, the huge part of the biggest part, I think, of where we've been able to gain business from is really being an authority. Even if you called me up today and I send you out that first email and it's got the podcast in the signature, or if not, I'm probably referencing a podcast like, oh man, you're in Logan Square. Like, we did an episode a few weeks ago on Logan Square. Like, you probably check out, you probably find it interesting. You might have, we talked about a specific property a couple blocks over. So we're always trying to tie it into it, because when somebody gets on there, it's any real estate investor is going to find it halfway entertaining. So to use it as an authority has been a huge way for us to, in the sales cycle of it.
That is, you'd be shocked how like much of an advanced strategy that is when I talk to people podcasting, right? Like like in the course that I used to teach on like this type of stuff, I call that creating content darts, right? Like what you just described there is, okay, you're Logan Square is an area in Chicago, I would assume, that has Flipper and BRR investor stuff and whatnot. You're out networking and you're like, oh yeah, you're doing a flip out there. I just interviewed somebody that was like talking about that thing. Let me send you this podcast clip or the podcast itself on it. And you're immediately forwarding something to someone that isn't like, hey, check out how great I am. You're leading in the door of value of just like, here's some information for you. And as they listen to that thing, they start to get cooked on like, oh, I like this guy. I want to do more business with this guy. This is somebody that I can refer to. I used to, when I first started podcasting, when I first started my business, I created this 15-minute origin story of like what I was doing, where I like spoke and rapped over this kind of like cool beat that I created. And in all of my Calendly links, I would say, before we book a meeting, have you listened to my intro, my last call intro on this thing with a link to it? And about a third of the calls that I'd get on, people would be like, dude, I listened to that thing. I think you're like the coolest guy I've ever met. Like they get there already kind of cooked on you, right? So this idea of having a piece of content that you can leverage to build a relationship with someone when you're not even in the room before the next time that you talk to them, to me is an absolutely genius move. And it's a kind of advanced move, but I'd love to get to, I'm talking to a lot of, I'm talking to a lot of property managers right now. Obviously, I'm telling this story of AI and Vendoroo and all the stuff that's happening, but most people recognize me from the NARPM talk, right? So like a lot of people are like, dude, help me make content. And I'm like, hell yeah. First thing first, start a podcast, right? Like, so if you were to start a podcast today, how would you start it? Like give advice to someone that's listening. That's like, yeah, I've been thinking about doing like in front of the camera videos to YouTube. I feel douchey just like talking to a camera. I like what Mark is saying. I get to be in front of somebody else and talking to them. Kind of like, how would you get started?
You have, so I would look at the market I'm in. I think there's two different markets you're in. You're either in a heavily accidental market, call it maybe like your West Coast cities, or you have truly investor markets that might be somewhere in the Sun Belt or in the Midwest is very investor friendly at this point still, even with pricing. And start, for us, we're very investor friendly. So it's really easy to do investor angled podcasts. Now, if you're in I guess if I was in California, I would more of like go an approach of how real estate is going to help you grow and all that stuff, and more from the financial advisor side of things than anything.
Okay.
Because if anything, you need to create more of your market in those markets. But man, if you're just trying to start off there, it just ends up being, there's a lot of benefits to it. And before we cut to something else, I'll just kind of say one more thing is, that same conversation that you're having with that person at the meetup and saying, hey man, check out this episode. You're also maybe going to him if you don't have an episode for him, saying, hey, you make a great guest on our episode. So now you're talking them up about that. So you're kind of gaining it from that way. So it ends up creating all these different opportunities for you different ways. But if you're looking to just start off, it's fairly low. I mean, to get the podcast going, and depending who produces it, it's a fairly low cost of time. I think my advice is to have a second person with you, a co-host. I do have a co-host, so I do benefit in not having to do 100% of the thinking all the time. And there's days we both show up, we're both on fire, and there's other days where one of us is down and the other person carries the other person. So I definitely would recommend that if you do it, have somebody do it with you. So
I like it, man. I like that you didn't go into blocking and tackling as much as strategy first, right? Like what I heard you say is essentially like make sure that you are making a podcast for the people that you want to do business with, right? Um, in a investor focused market, you're going to make it about the local real estate investing market. In a accidental landlord market, you might just be out there interviewing realtors, right? Like, because those are your referral sources of people that end up, like finding out that somebody is inheriting a house or something like that. And then just talking about like market education. I like as somebody who has done it solo and has done it co-hosted as well, I do think that the co-host dynamic is a lot of fun, right? It's like it's
it's
fun to do it
fun.
with a buddy. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's fun to do it with a buddy. It gives you more options because you have the option to host solo if you want, or both of you guys host, right? Like, you have other people that get to like be out there doing it. You reference again this idea. It is the ultimate networking tool, right? Like, oh, you're interesting. You should be on my podcast. You get a follow-up meeting with people all the time. Talk to me about how you guys think about um, episodes. Like, what's your kind of what's the creative load? Are you really just like out there networking and willy nilly? This guy's interesting, bring him on. Or are you guys planning out? This month we want to talk about HELOCs or whatever, right? Like, what is what? How do you guys kind of map it out?
so our underlying goal of the podcast is really to have people come on and talk about where they messed up. The vulnerability, like I might have 200 doors, but that only means he's messed up that many more times. So we want to hear some of those pain points, and that really helps humanize to our listeners, because no one likes to hear like, oh man, I got 200 doors, I'm awesome, you suck, you should do it faster, why didn't you do it sooner? Like no one likes to do that stuff. No one really can listen to that consistently, I guess, more so. So there's always got some undertone of value that people are getting, and we like to talk to people that have had those humbling experiences. So, we'll interview vendors that have some sort. A lot of our mortgage guys and all that stuff do have some investing in there, so that they'll bring to the show talking about the actual market and rates or whatever, or different programs out there. But in addition, there are a couple properties that they're managing or they bought, or what their foresight is. But then we're also like neighborhood shows or territory shows. So we have a very big landscape here in Chicago. So you got 77 communities and you have another 182 suburbs. So, we like to call it neighborhood shows, where you're able to really go deep on a neighborhood and ask, street by street, ask questions. And those become very valuable later. And those are great content creating shows. But then the other thing that you get is the changes in they passed some crazy ordinances in the city in November. So, I mean, within a day we had an expert on, and all of a sudden we were the people breaking that news to everybody. So, there's a lot of, in real estate and housing right now, there's a lot of resident advocates out there. There's a lot of landlord advocates, and they're fighting. And we're actually trying to find a way to bridge these conversations with people, and just take more of a neutral stance of, a lot of people are yelling, both sides are yelling about different things, and us trying to kind of actually get some sort of people on the same page. So we're kind of going after those three different things. So it's called neighborhoods, investors, and then really just policy.
Dude, I love it, man. I'm already seeing myself sending this to people. Right. So I'm really wanting to break this down because I have a couple of people that I'm like, yes, you should do this. And I don't know if I'm going to teach it again, but so what you just referred to is what in the content game we call, or at least my company, we call them content lanes, right? So it's like, you want to know what lanes you want to hit on, right? Like you identified that there's an interview of an investor, right? You've realized that you do business with investors, you're in an investor market, right? So you have investors that you meet, and you have an easy way of like, when we talk to investors, we're finding out how you messed up, right? Like that's like the crux of the tale, right? Like this is what you talk about. Then you're also talking about, hey, every city has their pockets of like what works and what doesn't. And, like per neighborhood or whatnot, so that you're going to like the different neighborhoods, the different, whatever asset types or whatever you're doing in the different neighborhoods, and you do like thematic neighborhood show that become much more like evergreen content for you. You could probably like do that once a year and then like refresh, and you find a local expert there, or you and your partner are just talking about what you know there. And then you're also looking for, so those are two lanes. One is the investor story lane, there's the neighborhood lane, and then you're talking about policy changes, right? Like these are these like moments that people can like what's called news hack, right? Like news jack, right? Like somebody is, hey, they just put rent increase limits somewhere. Let's talk about what this means. They just said that this is happening. Let's talk about what it means to you. Another version of this is also doing your like predictions or your forecast update for like 2025 or whatever, which is really common in podcast. And the beauty of establishing these like three ideas, which I think just about anybody could literally take and do this for their own market, these three ideas, is that it takes away the friction of like, what am I going to talk about this week? Right? Like it's not like I need to come up with something. You have this like formula for, okay, cool, man. Have you met anybody interesting? Yeah, dude, I met these three dudes. Let's see if one of these guys wants to get on the podcast. Okay, cool. Like what neighborhood have we not talked about in a while? Oh, this neighborhood. All right, let's go talk to somebody there and has something cool broken. Let's like have that on the show. Is that kind of how it goes for you guys? It sounds like a not a very high lift of creative ideation.
Yeah, you don't have to at this point. And I think the biggest thing is just consistently always, if you're going to stick in it long term, just consistently always flowing with who you got in your pipeline. Listen, there's been days where it's like, shit, we got to record something Saturday morning at 8 o'clock and find a guest because we thought we were good and two people canceled this week. So
Yeah,
we've
yeah.
done that a couple times. We haven't missed a week yet, but yeah, no, you're able to go that route. And if you're in a blue state, like man, there's usually endless conversation around policy and as a landlord, what you have to do to maneuver around the laws and so forth. So we definitely do benefit from that here.
Talk to me about, all right, so now we've talked a lot about like how to record it, how to program it, the benefits of it. Give me a little bit of the X's and O's, right? Like I find it shockingly simple to take a Zoom recording and just like pop it into a podcast host and voila, you have a podcast. Like how big is your operation on the back end of going from like interviewing someone to like putting it in content? Do you have VAs? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, we really have a team of three. And we have a team of three that does all the creation, and then distribution wise, my guy that I have, my marketing guy for GC, he does some of the distribution, and then we just have a couple of different other avenues. So we have a couple vendors. So it really ends up being, if you're going to talk about account, it's me, my co-host, the third guy, that young guy that helped us go in person, and then another kind of part-time marketing distribution guy.
Yeah, and what are they doing? Like give me kind of like what's the give me however much you know of the actual like SOP of from like having a conversation to like distributing.
Yeah. So I mean, so we do have a company that does all of the editing and sets it up on iTunes and that gets that all kind of ready for post production. That's the actual podcast, and then we take all that and we're putting it on YouTube. We're putting it on. We're taking all the clips, clipping it up. We're sharing it with the guests. We're sharing it then across all our different platforms. I'm posting something from mine on LinkedIn every single week. On my personal Instagram, I'm posting on there every week. That's the other thing for me. Instagram this past year is I fired up my own personal Instagram finally. For those that are laughing at me out there, man, that's such an easy way to message someone. Hey, man, maybe you'd be a good guest someday. And then right
Yeah.
away they tell you everything about their life because they're excited they're invited on it. So, but yeah, as far as distribution goes, we are not. We could do a lot more. Maybe if we had another part-time body and maybe knew exactly what to do, we could probably do a lot more. But what we've realized in the last year is, when we first started off, day one, our goal was like, hey, if we hit 200 people, that's a success. Or if we,
Mhm.
in a month time, we had to measure like what does success look like. And we're like, if we get to 200 people in a month time, that's great. We blew past that like within 3 hours of the first day. So that was huge. Did not see that coming. Um,
Interesting.
and we got all the way up to getting about 17,000 downloads on a monthly basis. and it's
go.
curved back down to, we range between 10 and 12 on a monthly basis. Now, I think real estate investing isn't as sexy as it was 3-4 years ago right now, and I could probably justify other reasons why I have less listeners, but um, for us, what we realized, like, man, we just have to get those 10,000 people engaging more. Like, all I need
Mhm.
is 10% of those people to be clients, and we're set for life, even less than that. So
Yeah.
it's less about blowing it up anymore versus how do I engage with these people now that they're in our ecosystem more. And that's really what the last 6 months and the next year is going to really dive down into.
Now you're talking about my favorite subject, right? Like you're going into community building, right? Like I think that this is why to me the single market property manager podcast is more valuable, right? Like because I don't really care about how big of an audience you have. How many people can you do business with? You don't need
Yeah.
that many, right? Like if you have 300 people listening to you that all know each other and all gather around you on a regular basis, you have a really like you have a top 0.01% referral network, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so how are you doing that, man? Tell me about kind of like how this thing evolves of like how you are seeing taking this thing from like an amorphous internet audience to getting people connected.
Well, I think we started that already and didn't realize it. We were joking about earlier about, our Chicago fact at the end of the episode. That's sponsored by somebody, but we play for somebody, a winner. So if you've bought something off, we have a merch store. If you bought something off our merch store or left us a review, we put your name in a hat and we draw your name. And so people are included in the show. We do try to drop names for people. We do try to, if you left us a post, so we try to bring people in naturally into the show. And if you hear your name on radio or on a podcast,
Yeah.
you feel cool, right? You feel like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I see my name. You try to play it loud enough so your wife hears it, and like, oh, they draw my name. So we started doing that already, and then what we really started doing early on was celebrating kind of our milestones. Like when we hit 100,000 downloads, like we had a party and we had 125 people there or something like that. And then we hit the 100th episode. We did a show in person. And then, so we celebrated all these milestones along the way up until even last year where it turned into, I think it was I don't know what it was, but we started having these events where people want to go to them. And we actually were able to charge money. So we charge 50, $60. They come out, and we have a good networking night. So we started building community around that, where people actually, you're only doing a couple events a year, where it's like, and we're only selling 100, 125 tickets, and people are, they sell it pretty quick and people want to go to it. So there's a level of exclusion. We started the Facebook club, and we only let so many people in there as well too, but we got a couple thousand people in there. So it ends up just being a true community. And if someone texts me right now, hey, I got a property for sale, anyone that's interested, I get random texts all the time. I would say, hey, go to the Facebook group and post that in there. And I mean, again, you're not going to have any more of a captured audience of what that guy's looking to do with his property he's trying to sell. So that's just some of the ways kind of we built the community. And I think the other thing that we've done as well too is we have a lot of downloads. So if you go to our podcast website, I'm a big Alex Hermosi fan of giving stuff away just to get your email address. So we put a lot of these things together, on how to turn a legal property into a legal unit, and these 7 steps, and download here, or here's our screening matrix, and this is how you're going to do it. And you get their email, and then you have to engage with them. I think the one thing that we've learned is, we have used a system like Lead Simple, which a lot of these people listening here use that. It's so easy to just send out random texts like, hey, what problem are you trying to solve with your rental property this week? And just, they're going to probably someone's going to have a problem. You're going to have a couple hundred people that'll have a problem this week that they engage back with. And that's opportunity to maybe solve one of their pain points through your services, or referring a guy or something like that. So,
Or make a podcast episode about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, man, I love that. You said a couple of things there that I wanna double in on for our friend who's listening. The first is this idea of what I call sharing the stage, right? Like if you are mentioning other people's names on the stage, they feel like a piece of it, right? And you can do that through all sorts of creative executions, right? Like getting a review, buying a piece of merch. If somebody sends in an idea for an episode, just be like, "Hey, Mark sent me this idea," like he's blah blah blah, right? Like and the more people hear their name on stuff, the more that they start to get a sense of ownership.
Or when people introduce people, that's the other way we do it, because it's alternate. The whole goal
Yes.
of it is around networking. So when someone
Yes.
refers us to me on an episode, we always say, "Hey, how we meet? This is how we met." No different than you and me started chit chatting early on. someone would have
100%.
introduced us. We would have dropped their name.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And at the end of the day, it's just, I've always naturally believed that being the guy that knows the guy is always a valuable place to be, right? Like, and what you've essentially created is like you've become this super connector with a very like tangible watering hole of like a Facebook group, an email list, a podcast that you can feature people on, and you can share the word about folks. It's becoming this like very relevant figure in so many people's lives because you decided to start having a weekly conversation with somebody and publishing it online, and it's led to all these great things. It really is to me just like the smartest form of networking, which I still think is a big piece of the biz dev game when it comes to local property management. Am I right?
Yeah, for sure. It goes back to maybe when I was a teenager, the whole, being in Chicago, I got a guy. Like me being able to
Yeah.
connect people meant people would like me. If I solve someone else's problem, they like me. Maybe there's other childhood issues I have here that we don't have to go into. But in the business world, it served me well. And then when I got into real estate, it turned into if I make other people money, they're going to refer me. And then, I mean, no one's not going to refer someone that's making money. That's how Ponzi schemes start, right? No, for real. As far as you make people money, they're going to keep coming back to you. You help them feel good. They're going to come back to you. They're going to remember you. And that's what a lot of when we're talking community is all about.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. The other thing that you mentioned was like lead magnets, right? Like creating lead magnets is a really, really great way to get people from the podcast engaged into your email list or vice versa. And I wonder, are you using podcasts as a way to like talk out what a lead magnet would be, and then take the podcast and create it into a lead magnet, or are you just creating separate lead magnets? Are you doing that type of stuff?
It happens both ways. Sometimes we'll
Yeah.
get guests that come out. We had the zoning's crazy here in Chicago, and we had an architect come on, and he put together this zoning cheat sheet. Like it was his kind of thing, but they had to go on there, download, and the architect got their information as well too, and so do we. So it was a win-win for everybody. We didn't even have to create the magnet, and but yeah, that thing is probably I think it's our number 2 most downloaded um, uh, giveaway. So the other thing that we did that just to draw people to the website was we took every single networking event, these real estate meetups, we just threw it on one page. So whenever someone's looking for Chicago real estate meetups, now I tell this to people, even if you don't have a podcast, take this and put this on your property management website. And now everyone's going to end up on your website.
Smart, super smart, man. So many golden nuggets in this thing. Last thing specific to podcasting, but initial distribution. You said that you broke through whatever your downloaded goals were immediately. Like, how did you initially get it out for people to like find the first episode? Was you just like blast your email list and everybody listened?
Oh no, it was very gritty. It was going through the 1,000 people that I haven't talked to in a long time and saying, "Hey man, check this out."
Okay, so you did some salesmanship. So you're like,
I
"Hey,
did.
I made a podcast, and here you go."
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there's the whatever email list we had, all that stuff, but it got pretty gritty as far as trying to hit everyone I knew that was in my phone just to at least check it out and give me at least that first download. So, but yeah, no, I think no matter what, man, I think I've tried to start a couple of different ventures in my life, and when I wasn't gritty, they never really made it. But the ones I definitely knew I had to go in, and it was going to be a hell of a 2-3 weeks that was good. Now we rolled out. We did 10 episodes at one time. We did 5 one week and then 5 the next week. So part of that was they always said, and this might still be true, is barely anyone makes it past 10 episodes and when they're creating a podcast. So I'm like, you know what, screw it. We're going to create all 10 right away. That way I can at least say we'll make it past that.
Yeah, totally, man. And that's something we're doing for this podcast too. Like we are recording 6 podcast episodes before we ever go live to make sure that we have enough in the tank to go. Did you guys release the 10 podcasts the same week, or you did what's called content stacking, which is essentially just like make sure that you set aside a certain amount of time to like record a whole bunch of stuff so you don't have to worry about recording later?
No, we did 5 and 5. So we rolled them out pretty quick.
Okay.
To get out there. So
okay. That's a good hack. If you understand that change is coming and AI is this giant industrial revolution, you're going to want to work with a company that is AI by DNA. And that, my friend, is Vendoroo. We are a native agentic AI solution built from the ground up with this assumption that the AI future is here. And what Vendoroo does it is able to handle 80 to 85% of all maintenance work orders from beginning to end, while elevating that extra 15 to 20% so that you can actually take care of it. And most importantly, just getting you out of the grind and the forever firefight of maintenance so you can do other things. Like one of our clients hired Vendoroo.ai, and within 6 months, the amount of time that saved her from maintenance, she dedicated herself to business development. She started adding 10 doors a month. Over the last 6 months, it's been 60 new doors. It's been a huge change, huge growth for her business, way more profitable. So if you want to do that, you want to get yourself out of the mundane, get your team out of the mundane, let them focus on stuff that really, really matters. Go to Vendoroo.ai, book a demo with us, and we would love to help you build an agentic AI property management business. Vendoroo.ai, book a demo. Enjoy the rest of the show. All right, man. When we were getting ready for this podcast, we were talking about this like dawn of AI, right? Like the premise of this podcast is this idea that as expectations have changed in property management from the outside, right? Like as the client has changed in property management because of the great generational wealth transfer, and as tools are changing as it relates to AI, somebody is going to break the frame of like what this modern kind of like way of doing property management is. And you immediately lit up talking about how much y'all are using AI. You wanna tell me a little bit about kind of how you at GC Realty Solutions, like kind of like how you have approached.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of the surface level AI that's out there, and that's what a lot of people talk about. And I'll just throw out the one thing for the podcast that was big that came up was, we used to pay someone $300-400 to make all the clips, and it went to all of a sudden now there's an AI that all of a sudden you get 60 clips in 60 seconds. Like that, so that was a
What's
big
that
game
program?
changer. I couldn't tell you what it was right now.
It's
I
like
forgot
Opus Clip or something like that, right?
Yeah. So there's a
Yeah,
few
yeah.
different ones like that, but I think that's the one we actually use. But yeah, so like the post production got way easier with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Creating images that you don't have to come off of have copyrights to is another small one that's just been beneficial as well too. But for us, the one thing that's always, as we grew as a property management company, was email and the what's going on inside these email chains. Now, one thing we shifted to a few years ago is we have a single email for all owners, and we could go in there and anyone can see it. If someone leaves, it's not stuck in someone's inbox that got deleted or something like that. But so we have single email for owners, we have single email for residents, and we've built out a mechanism to be able to read for email for client or resident sentiment inside of our email system. So we're able to flag emails if an owner's pissed, day one, versus finding out that guy fired us 3 weeks later because the person didn't realize how to solve it, never solved it, and then the guy got so pissed waiting, he fired us. So that's probably the most exciting one. I heard somebody talk about this on a podcast a few years ago, and I tried everything. It just wasn't within reach at that point to be able to put it into our system. But yeah, that's been a huge one for us right there.
Is that like an out of the box thing, or is that like you hired somebody to like program ChatGPT to do this for you?
My partner Cliff
Tell me
ended
about
up
that.
he built out something just like ChatGPT for that. So that's been pretty cool. But you got that. We have and a lot of what we've been doing has been through ChatGPT and just building out different subsets for it. And the other one that we've been doing is the maintenance goes from what the maintenance put in the system to creating a professional invoice. Don't get me wrong, we still review them and all that stuff, but what they're putting out 90% of the time is way better than what we were creating that we thought was awesome. So the way they're able to modify that. The other thing is when work orders come in, chat reviews the work order and it modifies to what maybe the tenant might be looking to get and what's 3 possible solutions for our team. So that's been something huge on that side. And then for screening, for hiring, screening is the wrong word, for hiring, when we hire all of our remote team members direct, the rest of the team, we have an in-house recruiter. And when they get off a screening call, we run it through something we built out in ChatGPT to basically complete our scorecard. Obviously we measured against what we thought, but and we asked in a lot of what gets measured in through AI ends up being based on the questions we ask. And it's been very valuable because when AI looks at your interview and it critiques you as the interviewer. You're like, oh yeah, you're right. I did ask too long-winded questions. So you start scripting out your questions better. And if AI is not, if you're not getting the right result through AI to compare against your scorecard, you're learning to ask better questions or different questions. So if anything, it's helped us organize our scorecards on the back end of screenings, but it's also helped us ask better questions. And that's where I think a lot of what we've been utilizing AI for is like, hey, can you give me three questions or can you give me three questions and ask them one at a time that will help me build out whatever I'm trying to build out. So kind of, man, just treating it like it's really the smartest person is just such a different versus just kind of ask Siri type questions.
How big is your company, Mark? How many doors under management do you have? How many staff members do you have?
So we have 1,400 residential doors, about 1 million square feet of commercial industrial space, and we are right around 60 people right now.
Got it. So who owns this? Like, do you have like is this because you or your partner are like super geeky into this and you're doing this? Do you have somebody in house? Like, do you have a process for how you've gone and developed all these different processes for different departments? Like, if I'm a property manager that wants to start doing this in house, like kind of like at the level that you're doing it, what infrastructure have you set up in order to like develop these things?
Well, one thing that we do have in place is we built out. So we use Appfolio for our really financial and leasing side of things,
Hmm.
but then everything else, all of our process flow, we built out in Podio.
Okay.
And so we're able to customize Podio a little more to be able to take in some of these different processes around AI. But it was my partner Cliff, who's our CEO. I think every company right now has to have somebody that take this and owns it, right? You just use that word, own it, and he's been the one that's really owned it. He's gone through a couple. He's gone through a couple seminars. So this is nothing he naturally knew 4 years ago because he knew code. He just has learned, self-taught himself to do this, and I think every company needs to kind of have that champion of it.
I was just having that same conversation with Greg Cohen from JWB Real Estate Capitals, right? So they're also in this like moment of how do we how do we integrate AI into the things that we do? And he's like, "What do you think? Do you think I should get a consultant to come like help me?" Should and I'm like, I really do think that there is good use for a consultant to come and analyze everything that you're doing, maybe build a process out for you, but I really think that there is in property management companies, the whoever is the owner of AI experimentation is a role to be had, right? Like it is very much like a can you look at all the different things that we're doing and then make a ranking list of how you think either generative AI can like help improve the process, or are there agents out there? Is there an agentic solution that we can be building towards? What's our tech stack telling us right now that is giving us any kind of either cost of switching or pain, or is there one of these like native AI solutions already that's out there that allows you to do this better? I think that that's the next great role within all of these organizations, at least at a certain size, of somebody that really does own that thing, right? Like just like you have a CTO at some point, or like whoever's managing your like IT stuff. I think there is this role that needs to happen. You got lucky that your partner is kind of like owning that thing, but if you don't have somebody that's already doing that, what do you think a role like do you think that that makes sense? What do you think a role like that would look like in a property management company of your size if you didn't have the partner, or do you think it's even feasible for people smaller than you?
Well, if I didn't have the partner, it would be me. I think that's how serious I am about it.
Yeah.
I'm lucky that he took it and ran with it,
Yeah.
with a little conversation. And but if it wasn't him, the first day, whatever, I don't remember, call it 2.5 years ago, and someone's like, "Look at this chat GPE thing," and I went on there, I asked a couple questions. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, we have to embrace this!" Like the feeling I had, I remember. I'll never remember that feeling where I was sitting, but I always remember that feeling. But yeah, I think it just ends up being a small business. Now, the cool thing is you have different people around our industry that are starting to experiment with it, that you could definitely lean on those people to get the code or to get the kind of the shortcuts. And there's people, I forgot that there's another podcast that talks a little bit about it as well too. But Wolfgang is big on it from Crane. So, but yeah, no, and call it your traditional property management company that's 800 doors or less. The owner is probably the one that needs to delegate everything else and figure out how they could take this to the next level, because that ends up being your 10x moment in that
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah. It's almost like one of those like Gary Vee moments, right? Like how Gary Vee's the first guy I was like, as the head of the company, like your job is to make content, right? Like you got to be doing it, right? Like, and everybody kind of, you obviously, and I obviously subscribe to that thesis, but this is another one of those inflection points, right? Like this is something that's going to touch everything that you're doing. And if you're not out there, um, trying to push the envelope and either push the envelope or at least contextualize it to you and your processes, it feels like you're going to be ripe for disruption, extinction, just like being completely out of the loop and not learning from this stuff, man. Are you finding is you mentioned Crane? I know that you're a Crane member. Is that like a big conversation that's happening inside of Crane?
It definitely comes up quite often.
Yeah.
I know. I think it ends up being, you get the people. You think you have two people right now. You have the people that are actually doing it, and you have the people that know they should be doing it.
Yeah.
And they more or less ask more questions than anything, just to kind of gauge their level of comfort. So, the one thing that I'll point out about AI is, so Wall Street, whatever, came in and venture back capital, however you want to word it, came in 2010 into our industry, and it's really gave a boost to our industry. And they've done a lot. The whole roll up thing went down, but the number one thing they couldn't figure out was the operations part.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they all stalled out, and they all went down, sold, whatever they might. When I say went down in doors, sold or whatnot. And man, if those guys start figuring that out, then that's their missing piece right there. And all of a sudden, those companies now, once they could operationalize everything, um, and to be able to still continue to grow and be able to organically grow, and that's a game changer. And more likely, they have the resources and are doing what we're talking about here today, trying to figure
Yeah.
that out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree, man. I think this is like one of these existential threats. I think when you look at these inflection points in markets where something technologically changes at this level, along with the other stuff, right? Along with like the client changing and the world has changed and all these different things, what you end up finding is there is one really big winner, right? And then there is maybe a second place, but then like third and fourth and fifth really starts to suck shit. Um, Unless there is a really big winner and then a whole bunch of like much smaller operations that are also super profitable, right? Kind of like Amazon has completely taken away Toys R Us and all these other like retailers, but there's still like the ecosystem of like direct to consumer sellers, right? So like when it comes to the property management industry, I don't know if there's going to be one big giant behemoth that happens nationally, but I'm pretty sure that where it's going to go, I'm not sure. My thesis is where it's going to go locally, there's going to be one incumbent that dominates the market, and maybe there's like one or two. And then I think there's just going to be a whole bunch of small property managers that um, figure out that kind of like 300, 400, 500 door portfolio with technology, a good like network of like vendors and like nothing else is kind of where I see it going. Where do you see it going in the next like 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I think you worded it pretty spot on. I think you'll have the big companies, and you'll have the smaller lifestyle companies.
Yeah.
And when I say lifestyle, it's we're happy for 500 doors. We're super profitable because we're not looking to scale. We're not, the owner or the husband and the wife owner, they're doing majority of the C-suite thinking and strategy, if that's even necessary. They're providing a service. They have a very close connection. So I think you put it pretty well, where you're going to have the big guys, you're going to have the small lifestyle businesses.
Cool. All right, man. I prepped you a little bit for this before. We're trying to show people that change isn't bad, that we change all the time, right? So what is something that you were completely sure about in your 20s that you no longer believe at all and you act completely against?
Ah, Back to the Future too, flying cars. Yeah, no. There's been certain things that um, the industry has just jumped over, right? Storage of data, like that was something I never saw coming. The whole cloud, like, it
Yeah.
was like how many? It went from file cabinets to as many CD-ROMs to disk drives to, man, we need nothing anymore. Like your computer can basically be thrown away in a matter of a few minutes because there's nothing on it anymore. Call it the way we store things these days.
You know that did you see that meme that was like, if Back to the Future 2 were done today, it'd take place in like 1993?
No.
Like, I mean, it was like 30 years in the past, right? Like it was like from like 85 to like 65. So like if it were to take place today, it'd literally be like 1995, man.
Yeah, oh, man. Yeah. I saw something the other day that it was we're closer to, if you were born in 1980s, you're closer to 1930s than you are to 2025 or something like that.
That's crazy. That's crazy, man. Mark, anything else, man? Is there anything else I haven't asked you about that you think is relevant to this conversation?
No, I think I am super bullish on our industry, and whenever someone gives me their ear, I tell them how anyone that's listening to this podcast or involved in this industry is super lucky to. There's not too many like startup industries in the first couple decades, and I really think that's where we're at as an industry right now. So there's so much opportunity, and even if you stay small, there's still ways a lot of opportunity, and I think a lot of the opportunity comes from what we all complain about the most: regulation.
Mm.
Regulation is not going away anytime soon. It's only going to get worse, and that's only going to make people want property managers more. And there's not too many industries where the blue ocean is bigger than actually market size that we're all or market share that we all have right now, and that's huge. That only means that we're able to work together to get that blue ocean, get more of the piece of that blue ocean
Yeah, man.
under contract.
I love it, dude. I love it. Yeah, the regulation piece, right? Like it's constraints that drive innovation, right? Like it's when things are when you have rules that you have to abide by, that's when you can like really innovate and get really really creative. So I think it's a massive opportunity. I think like all the changes that are happening, the biggest kind of like wealth is created during these massive inflection points, and it's hard to find an industry that's more like in the middle of like these extinction level event, massive inflection points and property management, which can be scary if you're gonna, like sit there and be worried about it. But like guys like you, I think the sky's the limit, man. I think it's really cool. What's your overall kind of ambition for what you guys are doing, man? Like if you're seeing this industry as this like beautiful blue ocean, like how big do you think you want to go with it, or what's it look like for you in 10 years?
Um, I don't know. I think about it all the time, but I still don't have a good answer for that. But I think the one thing that we're trying to do here at GC is build an enterprise business as much as possible. Where if I want to walk away and hold on to it, someone else can operate it. I think all three of our partners feel that way. But at the same time, if in the next couple of years we had some sort of strategic merger with somebody that could help us go to the next level, or somewhere that we could help take to the next level. I think we're down for anything that come our way. Or who knows? Sell all together. My partners retire, and I go do it again. I'm not sure. So
Cool, man. That's awesome. Um, Really grateful you did this, man. I'm really pumped that you got to be in this like first slate of episodes. I always find that the first couple of episodes that get released on a podcast are the ones that are most downloaded, because people always kind of like, if they like what they heard, they'll go back to the beginning. And just on a personal level, man, from the moment I met you, the the kingmaker ethos that you have, right? Like this idea of like you really understand the value of making other people feel special, the seeing the value in others and promoting others, man, has just like dripped off you, and I really, really connect with it, man. So I'm pumped that this is kind of like the second thing we've done together, and hopefully we get to do a whole bunch more stuff. And I appreciate you being here, man.
yeah, I'm grateful for our relationship, man. Thank you.